Welcome everyone. Welcome to the first lunch and learn session of the new school year. It's really good to have so many of you here. And yeah, for our first session, first of many. So yeah, it's really good to see many people joining today. Do pop your name and where you're listening from in the chat. Would be really great to see whereabouts in the world you are. We'll be recording the session today, so just so that you're aware, if you have to pop out at any point, you can catch up, because we'll then send an email after the event so that you're able to look back over or miss any bit or catch up on any bits you might have missed. If you've got any questions or comments throughout the session today, do just pop them in the chat, and we'll follow up with any questions that you've got at the end of the session. So I'm going to introduce myself. So I'm Hannah Smith. I'm an outreach consultant with Beyond Autism, and this is my colleague.
Hi, I'm Matt Wicks, also outreach consultant at Beyond Autism.
Before we get started as well, I do just want to mention that there are some handouts in the chat. So we're going to be talking about ABC forms today, so antecedent behaviour consequence forms. So we have got an example of one of those that's downloadable from the handouts section, but let us know if you're having any issues accessing those. Okay, so we'll get started. So yeah, today we're going to be having a look at ABC So What? So using antecedent behaviour consequence forms as a tool to analyse behaviour, understand what behaviours are communicating, and then use effective interventions that are based on what we're seeing and what we're understanding through the use of these ABC forms. So some of you may be familiar with these forms. There's one on the screen up at the moment. It may be presented in different ways that you've seen before, but essentially it's looking at what's the setting, so when, where, or who is present, what the antecedent is, so what happened before the behaviour occurred, so writing anything that happened within the environment at that time, what the behaviour was, so really specifically describing exactly what you see. So instead of writing something like meltdown or tantrum, being really specific about what those behaviours were that you observed, so whether it was kicking, hitting, shouting, etc. The purpose of that really helps us to then be really clear across people supporting the young person of what those behaviours are. And then the consequence. So what happened after the behaviour occurred. So again, similarly like with the antecedent, just describing anything that happened within the environment after that behaviour. And I think sometimes the word consequence can feel a little bit confusing, and it feels as though there has to be a specific consequence, as it were. But it's literally just anything that happened in the environment after that behaviour occurred. So the reason that we would use an ABC form is to understand behaviours that challenge. So what are these? People often refer to aggression or self-injurious behaviour when discussing behaviours that challenge, but we should consider it to be any behaviour that has a negative effect on the person and their environment, so those around them. So that might include behaviours such as self-injurious behaviour, head banging, biting, scratching, aggression towards others, such as hitting, hair pulling, throwing objects, kicking, etc., destroying property, screaming or yelling, or running away. So behaviours that are putting that young person at risk or potentially putting others at risk. So those would be the behaviours that we'd want to be looking at when we're completing these forms. So what we're going to be looking at today is having a real focus on behaviour as communication. So all behaviours happen for a reason. They're all communicating a certain need. And as we already know, autistic people can experience difficulties in communicating their needs. And obviously being unable to express yourself, if you can't express things perhaps vocally, then you're going to express your needs in another way. So really looking at those behaviours that challenge as a form of communication. And the key to understanding behaviour is in the relationship between the individual and their environment, because what we know from the evidence is that most behaviours learn. So i.e. it comes to fulfil a particular function for the individual over time. As we're going through these slides, being aware that the function of a particular behaviour will vary across individuals, time and across settings. But what we're going to do now is I'll hand over to Matt, and Matt will talk through functions of behaviour.
Great, thanks, Hannah. So when we think about we want to find out the function of behaviour, the first thing we need to do is make sure we're trying to rule out any medical causes. So if there's a maybe the young person's in pain, they can't communicate that, that could be a reason for the behaviours challenge. So the first thing is we rule that out. If that's ruled out, then we start to look at what the function could be. There are 4 functions of behaviour. We start at the top there with escape. And what that does for the individual, it means that they can avoid or get away from an undesirable event. And when does that occur? That occurs if the event maybe is too hard, it's too easy, it's too boring, or scary. Another function is attention, and that's about the individual gaining access to people or interactions. And that can be positive or negative attention. That occurs basically when the social interaction is desired from the individual. Tangible as a function, what that does to the individual is it gains them access to preferred items or preferred activities, things that they want, things they want to do. And that occurs when the preferred item or the activity is desired. And then the final function here, we have sensory. So what that does to the individual is it's a behavior that just feels good, provides some sensory feedback. And that can occur at any time, whether they're alone or with others. It's not tied to other people. So they're the 4 functions of behavior. Then we need to also think about multifunctions of behavior. So behaviors may be communicating more than one function at a time. Also, different behaviors may communicate different functions. So in a scenario here, kicking might happen when the young person's asked to brush their teeth. They then get to go and watch TV and have a chat with their sibling. So in that situation, we're looking at the function of avoidance from toothbrushing. Maybe they don't want to do toothbrushing, so they can avoid it that way. But then they're also getting access to the TV, so that would be a tangible function, and also getting attention from their sibling, which is another function. So we're never, pretty much all behaviors are not going to have one function. There's going to be things happening afterwards that could be another function as well. So if we then come back to the ABC form that Hannah showed earlier, we start to record these behaviors when they're occurring. We're writing what's happened before, what's happened afterwards, and that starts to build up a picture. And we can identify patterns, and we can see potentially where those, what the function might be. We're going to go into a bit more detail on that now. So I'll pass back to Hannah, and she'll
Yeah, so we want to be using the ABC forms to start to determine the functions of behaviour, so what those behaviours are communicating. And it's really, really important to get everybody's views, everybody's input when we're looking at these ABC forms and analysing them. So meeting with the pupils key team, getting together, having a look at the ABC forms that you've completed, ideally completing them for a couple of weeks and then stopping there and having a review and having an analyse. We don't want to be kind of just taking ABC data forever and ever. We want to be making sure that we've agreed a point, a cut-off point where we can get together as a team and have a look at what the possible functions could be. So the kind of things that we want to be pulling out, so the certain patterns would be looking at the day and time. So is it that you can see that these behaviours are happening every morning after snack time, or are they happening just before lunch? Seeing if there's any particular patterns there. Also looking at the antecedents. So are there particular triggers? Is it that every single time the child is asked to do a maths activity, that's when you're observing the behaviours, so we can start to understand the clear triggers. We'd also want to be looking at the consequences and any patterns there. So in terms of how people are responding, certain things that are happening in the environment that seem to be correlating with that behaviour. So really starting to draw out those patterns and then starting to see whether you can figure out and determine what those possible functions could be. So remembering everybody eats, everybody has behaviour. So in terms of the functions, escape, attention, tangibles, or is it a sensory behaviour? So what we're going to do now is Matt and I will do an activity together just to look at an example of a behaviour occurring and pull that information into each of the areas of the ABC form. So I'll read out the example and then we'll start to piece the bits together. So it was 9:15 a.m. carpet time, and the class were learning about multiplication with their class teacher. After around 10 minutes, Joe started to kick his feet and shout out. The class teaching assistant asked Joe to come to the back of the class and gave him some Lego. The kicking and shouting stopped. And I think that's really helpful as well when you are writing your ABCs to indicate when the behaviour stopped in the consequence section, because that really helps us to understand what's kind of turning off that behaviour. So, sorry, Matt, I'm giving you the answer. What would we have in the setting? What part of that information that we've got would we add to the setting box?
So you could put the time, 9:15, it was carpet time, and who was there, like the teacher and the rest of the class?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we just want to know the time, where the child was, and who was around. How about the antecedent? What would go into that box?
So that would be it was multiplication, wasn't it, they were doing? Yeah, and having sat on the carpet for about 10 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So the activity they were doing is carpet time, be really specific about what was happening. So we have that information there. So it was multiplication, and also, yeah, being aware of how long they were sat there. That's really helpful information as well. How about the behaviour?
So that would be when Joe started to kick his feet and shouting out.
Yeah, exactly. So again, being really specific about what those behaviours were that were observed. And the consequence.
So the consequence is when the teaching assistant took Joe to the back of the class, gave him some Lego, and yeah, the kicking and shouting stopped.
Yeah, absolutely. Well done, Matt. It's like you've done these before. And then what would the possible function be? Maybe have a think yourselves as we're talking through. So we've got all that information. We know what happened before. So they were doing carpet time. That's when the behaviour started to occur. And then the consequence was that they left that activity, went and did some Lego, and that's when the behaviour stopped. So thinking about the possible function here, is it escape? Is it attention? Is it access to tangibles, so a specific activity or item? Or is it a sensory behaviour that the behaviour in itself brings about that nice feeling? So, Matt, spoiler.
So yeah, I'd say that the fact that the behaviour stopped indicates it's probably escape. Maybe multiplication is really difficult. Sitting on the carpet for any length of time can be hard. But then there's also additional stuff going on. So potentially access to the tangibles, being able to play with Lego, just the attention from his TA. Yeah, they're all possible things.
Yeah, exactly. And as Matt said, so when he was taken away from that activity, that's when the behaviour stopped. That may indicate escape being that primary function. But we'd probably want to see a few more examples here just to explore those other functions as well, and whether escape is actually the primary function, because as Matt said, it could also be that he gets access to Lego. Is Lego something that Joe really loves doing? And he also gets to have some one-to-one time with the TA. Is it that he really loves that adult attention and spending time with this particular teaching assistant? So yeah, considering all of those different elements.
Okay, so we come back to the visual we used before for the functions, but now we've got an additional column. It's great to figure out what the function of a behavior is, or what we think it might be, but then what do we do with that information? Like, so what? So that's when we come in and we start thinking about what interventions we can put in place to reduce the behaviors that challenge. So if we look at the first one, escape, what can we do then to prevent escape behaviors occurring? We want to think back to behavior as communication. Can we teach the young person to be able to ask appropriately to leave a situation, to ask for a break? We also want to think about the demands that we're placing. Are the demands being pitched at the wrong level? If we're asking someone to do something that's too tricky, do we bring it back down to a level that's easier? Maybe some pre-skills teaching before moving on to the more difficult stuff. Also, we can look at reinforcement within the teaching and making sure that's all happening as well. If we're thinking about attention as a function, what can we do there? We can provide attention when the individual is on task. So making sure that they're getting that attention that they crave at the right times. Also teaching them to appropriately request for attention, maybe understanding to be able to put your hand up, tapping someone on the shoulder to get their attention. For tangible function, again, coming back to that behaviours communication, if someone wants something and they have no way of asking for it, then they're probably going to be engaging in behaviours that we would see as challenging. So teaching them to be able to ask, whether that's through Makaton, through PECs, vocals, just being able to articulate things better, you're going to see that response rather than the behaviours that challenge. And then finally, for a sensory function, we're only looking to intervene on those kinds of behaviours if they're really creating a barrier for that person being able to access education or social interactions, or if they're harmful. And if they're harmful, it might be that we can think of alternative behaviours that then still meet that same sensory function. And that would be the only sort of time that we'd be looking to intervene on any sort of sensory kind of behaviour. Okay, I'll pass it back to Hannah.
So bringing us back to that ABC example that we had with Joe in the classroom at carpet time. Now we have that understanding of those possible functions. We want to, as Matt was explaining, want to have a look at what are the function-based strategies that we could use. So on this slide, there's a couple of examples. And as we're talking, I'll think of some other examples that we might give, but some general ones. So if we know that it's escape, it might be teaching Joe an alternative way of communicating that need. So using something as a break card and teaching him to use that break card as an alternative way instead of the kicking feet and shouting happening to indicate this is too much and I need a break. Use of reinforcement. So it might be specific behaviours that you've identified that he might, have something on a sticker chart. It might be a marble. So often classes have marble jars, and when he's sat on the carpet for X amount of time, might get a marble in the jar or a sticker on his chart, whatever that system might be, because essentially we want to increase and those alternative behaviours instead. Also things like visuals always. So now a next system. So if Lego is something that we know he really enjoys, it'd be carpet time first and then Lego next, and giving that really clear visual to Joe so that he can have that clear understanding of what's happening now and what's happening next. You might want to use a timer alongside that. So if we know that he's sitting on the carpet for 10 minutes and that's when you start to see those behaviours that challenge starting to occur, we might set it at 5 minutes so that we know that he can be successful and we're building up that time. So now carpet time 5 minutes, setting up that timer, and then next some Lego time. Might be that you set up some time with Lego and the teaching assistant before carpet time so that Joe's already had some access to those preferred activities that he likes before going to carpet time. So really looking at, the escape function there. So teaching him that alternative way of communicating the need, the possible attention aspect. So giving him that time before carpet time with the teaching assistant, and that access to tangible. So using the now and next, using the reinforcement, etc. Matt, any others that you'd want to add there? You're on mute, Matt.
Had to happen once. Yeah, no, I think that's good. Covered everything. Like you said before, we wouldn't always be looking at just one example as well. There would be multiple behaviours that we'd be looking at, and there'd be different situations for each one. So obviously for our examples here, we've just got the one. Yeah,
definitely. We would never kind of just want to go off, like Matt says, one example. We would want to have multiple examples so that we can clearly understand what those functions are to then put in those appropriate function-based strategies. So what we're going to do now is just have a look at some proactive strategies and reactive strategies. And these are more general proactive strategies and reactive strategies. Once you know the function, you want to be putting in specific function-based strategies, but just to give an idea of some proactive and reactive. The proactive strategies would be things that we're putting in essentially proactively. So all of the time you want to be putting these strategies in, and these are put in place to avoid the need for those behaviours that challenge to happen in the first place. So things like personalised teaching, use of now and next boards, social skills sessions, selective demands placed. So yeah, being aware of that demand level that's correct for that young person, using adapted curriculums, social stories, warnings or countdowns, and visual schedules. And some reactive strategies would be reactive strategies we want to have less of a focus on. So that would be when the behaviours that challenge are already occurring and the things that we might do at those times. But as I said, we really want to be focusing on the proactive strategies. So reactive strategies might be things like simply doing nothing, because if you're thinking about a young person who's there's behaviours that challenge, they're going to be in that red zone if we're thinking about zones of regulation, and they're not going to be able to process instructions or more information at that time. So sometimes literally just saying and doing nothing can be the best solution. And it also means that you don't potentially reinforce a behaviour by adding any attention or extra things to that situation. If it's safe to do so, direct the individual to a safe place. Giving simple instructions if you need to give instructions, so sit down, or agreeing a script across the staff members working with that child, so that every single time that everyone's saying the same thing and it's really consistent. Continue with the demand that's placed if that's appropriate. Just thinking about the level of the behaviour. We don't want to be kind of continuing that and escalating it, but if it's safe to do so, then do that. And try not to, as I was saying, try not to attend to the behaviour too much. Even if attention isn't the function, it could then become the function.
Great. So in summary, we've looked at what behaviours that challenge are. We've then thought about behaviour as communication, what the 4 functions of behaviour are, the fact that we always have to consider that behaviour can be multifunctional, then how we use ABC data sheets to determine the functions, how we analyse that, we look at patterns. And then once we've got that function, what are we doing with it? We're looking to implement proactive strategies, as many as we can before the behaviour, to reduce the chance of it happening in the first place. And then also some reactive strategies just to make sure we keep everything safe, get back to baseline. So that's everything for now. If anyone's got any questions, please do put them in the chat. We got one come through on the private chat, and it's saying, how much data should you be taking throughout the day? Is it specifically for behaviours that challenge, or can it be used in other situations? I'd say we want to make sure that all the behaviours that challenge are being recorded, because we need to get the real picture of what's happening. It might seem like, we've recorded one, so that's the same for everything, but different people might experience things in different ways, different times of the day. So it's really good to real picture, especially as myself or Hannah, we're behaviour analysts going into a school. We only get to see what we've got on the data or when we're in. So having as much information as possible is really helpful. You can always quickly record something at the time and then later add a bit more detail. Yeah, and that's really going to help. And like Hannah said before, we're not going to then be just doing this forever and ever. The idea is we do it for a few weeks and then get together with the team, analyze it, and then start to put things in place. And then there might be different ways of recording behaviour just to see how the intervention's going.
Yeah, I think what you said, Matt, is a really good point about just jotting some key things down, because we know what it's like in a classroom. It can be incredibly busy. So if you've kind of seen the behaviour, you've observed the A, the B, and the C, just jotting some keywords down and then coming back to it at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if anyone has any things they think of afterwards, any more questions, feel free to contact us. I think we've got the last slide. We've got all the details up there. Other than that, thanks so much for attending and listening to our talk today. We will be, like Hannah said at the beginning, we'll be sending the recording round. You'll be able to access that at any time. There'll also be feedback. So if you do get a chance to fill in the feedback, we really appreciate that. It really helps us know what we need to do for next time. The next Lunch and Learn session is, it's called What is an Adapted Curriculum? Approaches for Autistic Learners. That will be on Friday, the 9th of December. And that's being presented by Sarah Dominic, Deputy Head of Park House School, and Catherine Bale, the Pastoral Lead. Yeah, other than that, really, just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending. Hope to see you next month. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone.